got Ronke Onodoke here with us. She's an oil and gas consultant, as well as Mr. Bayo Rotimi, who is a financial consultant as well as of the Quest Advisory Services. Yeah, that's still right, isn't it?
Indeed.
Okay, thank you both for coming on this morning.
Thank you.
Let me start with you. Any need to hit the panic buttons yet?
Yes, 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 yes.
Oh dear.
Press. Nigeria is in trouble. Nigerians are in trouble. First and foremost, we had a huge budget that we were servicing with partial debt. We have huge debts to repay back. Economy isn't doing well around the world. And then now we have this issue of Russia and Saudi Arabia having their thing, and the coronavirus looming, productivity slowing down in China, crude oil prices dropping. On the part of Nigeria, our own contribution or our undoing is the fact that we're paying heavily to subsidize petroleum products on debt, which is absolutely unnecessary. Only 20% of the richest Nigerians are the ones that benefit from the subsidies on petroleum products, and I'm just wondering where we're going with all of this.
The thing about that is, I mean, they always talk about these things, politicians. Well, at least before some got into office, they spoke about it. You thought that upon assumption of office, it was going to be the first thing to go. But
we thought so.
Looking at the things, maybe when reality dawned, it's not that easy. Do you ever see them just facing that headlong and taking that off?
I think the rationale behind why we need to liberalize the downstream sector isn't clear or understood by politicians, perhaps, or the powers that be that can make that happen. One of the first things that they need to understand is supporting subsidy on a consumed product doesn't really make economic sense. If it was on productivity, then I would understand that Nigerians at the bottom of the pyramid or the urban poor are benefiting, more than the urban poor are benefiting from it, which is not the case. Another thing about the subsidizing of fuel is that if you could afford it, or if we were producing locally, local crude, local refining, not having anything to do with relying on foreign exchange, we would be better off for it. Unfortunately, Nigeria does not, we don't own foreign exchange. The only way we have foreign exchange is by selling our crude oil. And the whole economy is dependent on the availability of this foreign exchange. So it's not just, to subsidize fuel, it's our consumption in terms of food, it's the services that Nigerians enjoy. Our entire lifestyle is dollar funded. So we're a petrodollar economy. And until we start looking inwards and relying on Naira, whereby, if like the US, when they run out of dollars, they can print it, we cannot print dollars.
But the thing about that too, Mr. Rotimi, is that government has, we've heard time and again them talking about encouraging us to, as the former Minister of Agriculture says, buy local, eat local. They're encouraging us to grow the economy. They say, well, shutting of the border, or at least they talk about local consumers and manufacturers who are benefiting. So how do we juxtapose all of that with the stark reality on ground?
Well, I think it is important to take a holistic view. Attempting to boost local production without the infrastructure to support it is kind of hiding behind one finger.
What would this infrastructure be?
Now, if you have farmers who have no roads, no access road to get their produce from the farms to the nearest markets, to the processing centers, there is a disconnect. So I believe that the current situation we're facing can be described as a perfect storm. Everything that can possibly go wrong seems to have gone wrong at about the same time. This is a good opportunity for Nigeria to hit the reset button. Let us examine our journey of 60-odd years.
If I could just follow through with your initial comments about the road infrastructure. But how do you, because they're not just doing nothing about it. We've seen, at least in some areas, some construction going on, budgetary allocation and provision for some of those construction of the roads. So with time, isn't that when it does come on stream, that will have an impact, won't it?
Chamberlain, infrastructure can never be funded entirely from the government's balance sheet, especially when you have a balance sheet or a revenue profile that is as volatile as it is. So between January and now, you have seen what has happened to oil prices. Suddenly, our budget has been made nonsense of, and the government now has to quickly sit down and recalibrate that budget, reduce the benchmark, reduce the expenditure, the revenue expectation, and so on and so forth. So my view is, let's deal with the structural issues. Let us deal with the fundamental issues. We have a situation where we plan to spend in 2020 in excess of 5 trillion naira on recurrent expenditure. Maybe this is the time to dust up the Oronsai report, where ministries, departments, and agencies that are duplicated, this is the time to streamline those things. Government and the cost of running government is way too high. So now that our revenues have taken this kind of a hit, let's address the expenditure problem, and then let us seek private sector participation to support government in the delivery of infrastructure so that the rural areas and the urban areas can be better connected.
Well, it's a good thing you said that the government alone cannot fund, infrastructure of the roads, because I'm aware that the World Bank and some other foreign organizations are doing something in the area of rural road infrastructure to help with that. Let me bring this to Mr. Onadoko. You mentioned the other time the fact that we are servicing debt with debt. Was this lost on us hitherto?
I think Nigerians at least at this time, should be aware that government is borrowing very heavily. And our revenues are dwindling because the prices of oil have dipped and are likely to continue to dip. We're hoping it doesn't get down to as low as $20. Any country that's producing crude oil above $30 is already in trouble. So now that prices have dropped, and then we have the additional responsibility of security issues, leakages, pipeline vandalization, militancy, and all of that, which makes it even more expensive to get the crude out of the ground than any of the other alternatives. There are other African countries, other emerging economies that have crude oil that people don't have to spend that additional sum to get the crude oil out. Our policies are not consistent. We've refused to, pass the PIB. So fiscal terms are not clear to investors. We just have a deficit in almost every, index that you look at in the oil value chain. So why are we in this space now? Because we could have done something. Now the prices are extremely low. This is the time to liberalize the oil and gas sector.
What could we have done? You just said that we could have done something. What could we have done?
We've had opportunities when crude prices dropped that the government could have pulled out and said, let's leave the crude, the oil price to float based on demand and supply from the market. When at this time now that the prices of crude oil have gone down, if the government pulls out now, we probably would be buying petrol at the pumps for much less than is available right now. So when it starts to readjust, if it readjusts, it would go up slowly and the market would understand why it's going up. And then the government will be relieved of at least $1 trillion of cost.
But now, this committee, the presidential committee to review this budget and all of that, I saw that when the report was coming on the other time, you both were applauding. What are your expectations? Are you optimistic?
$57 seemed realistic when this was set. With all the things that have happened, it doesn't make any sense anymore. We don't know what the rest of the year is going to look like. We don't know how bad the coronavirus spread is going to be. We don't know if and when China is going to recover back to full stream. And as we're moving and adjusting to this, so are those other economies. China could take an outlook to slow things down for the next 6-12 months. not ramp it back up as quickly as we're thinking. Those are the things that are going to affect us, because if there's no demand for oil, we have no revenues, and we are 100% dependent on revenues coming from oil and gas. They've just moved up tax prices. More people are going to evade their paying taxes because it's more expensive. We didn't even have the traction.
Does that mean the more people go to
Well, I don't know what's going to happen to them. I hope they can track the people who are, and people are going to lose jobs. You lose jobs, less people are paying taxes because they fall back into the informal sector.
Right. When you talk about the benchmark, which is what the Minister of Finance talked about, that they're planning to review, what price will be good for you?
Oh, I'm not an economist, so I wouldn't even try and attempt to do that, but I would suspect that they would be a lot more conservative based on the prognosis of what might happen on the OPEC side. Russia and Saudi Arabia, they're two big people. Both of them have very little at risk in terms of their people. If they decide to keep this going for a longer period of time, they have enough cushion to do that. We don't.
Well, there's a lot of talk about that, especially because we know that eventually it will hit everybody, even Saudi Arabia and Russia. So this is meant to be like who blinks first kind of scenario. But let me just hazard and ask you also, what benchmark would be good enough for you if we're going to review?
I think I have to toe Ronke's line. I will advise government to be ultra conservative. So if oil prices have lost $20, or we're currently at least $20 below the benchmark, and this drop happened literally within 2.5 months, my view is go ultra conservative. So I suspect that, or I would recommend that it has to be in the lower 20s. So assume that very little is going to come by way of oil revenues. Now let's actually look at in Nigeria. How can a Nigeria move forward in an era of depressed prices? We've seen oil prices at $10 before, $12 before. Nigeria as a country, we pushed through. I think that, this oil curse that we talk about, it has limited our potential as a nation. So I honestly, personally, don't have a problem with very low oil prices, because it is going to force us to recalibrate our economy, and it is long overdue.
I think I see a trend. It seems you both agree in some sense that this is a blessing in disguise.
I think
perhaps.
so.
So maybe we should start picking out the positives. Yes, you said earlier that we should hit the panic button, but it's interesting you think this is a blessing in disguise. And I'd like to begin. You talked about subsidy on the recoveries, as they say.
Yes.
And people have been wondering, so maybe this means the price of petrol will come down, maybe? The government will take hands off subsidy, maybe?
Well, the executive of the Federal Republic of Nigeria have the veto. They've been able to shut down the border when they thought it was absolutely necessary. I don't think they consulted with people, and there was no riot. And the bottom of the pyramid was affected, or is affected, by the closure of the border. Lagos State at some point decided no more Okadas in certain areas. They didn't and got away with it. So why is it that when it comes to the issue of liberalizing the downstream sector, there's this fear that the bottom of the pyramid is going to collapse? When taxes went up to 7.5, the bottom of the pyramid didn't collapse.
We'll come back to that. Perhaps because hitherto, over the years, whenever there is an oil price increase, petrol price increase, there's always a riot.
We had a study done about 3 years ago, and we actually went across the country, across the entire oil value chain, to find out what Nigeria's views were on the subsidy issue and removal of the subsidy. This was soon after the Enough is Enough campaign and the strike and the whole disruption at that time. And hitherto, recently, we redid that same survey, and every single group that was pro-subsidy have reversed their opinion. Now they're like, let's get rid of it.
How recent is this?
I'm talking about the last 12 months. The issue of the Enough is Enough disruption was more about curbing corruption and leakages. And it got sold to the whole country at that time, as in people don't want the subsidy to come off. So it was more about us curbing corruption. People saw oil traders buying private jets, living large lifestyles, and they just felt it was free for all. And that was why they were saying, if you took the subsidy off and that money was kept in the government coffers, it would get embezzled, it would get, the corruption would reach it and the money would disappear. So please leave it where it is. At least we know where it's going. But now the opinion is we can't even afford it and we're not enjoying it. Let it go.
To be realistic, if we're going to press the reset button, as you both have said, and look inwards, how quickly can we do that?
I think every human being just needs to take, I pull out an item of clothing from my wardrobe, I check if it's dry clean only, I put it right back and put the hand wash, the one that my washman can wash. It's that simple. Because every single thing we're doing in Nigeria has a foreign exchange component. We need to move away from that. The chemicals they're using in the dry cleaner's shop is imported. The food we're buying for our children. Every child now is having cereal, breakfast cereal by Nestle or some foreign cereal. Ogi's gone. Quaker Oats is, the things that
still
we
have
need
Ogi
to...
in my fridge, but
we're on the same page here. So we need to start looking local. Seriously local to cut down our costs individually.
Mr. Rotimi, they did say there too that they were going to work with the National Assembly to see how they could sort some of these things out. And then speaking about that, do you see any role for them, particularly when it has to do with states? Because the economy of states is equally important in the scheme of things. The federal government's budget, it's a large percentage of the entire scheme of things. But how do we approach states? Or how do we approach the laws regarding the states bringing the law to the table?
I think that engaging the states is a totally different conversation. I think our political structure has given independence to some degree to states to make their own laws. The president, as the head of the federal government, cannot give directives and instructions to the states. He can only encourage. My view is this: let the federal government set the standard. Let us use this opportunity. Let the National Assembly promulgate laws that can liberalize our economy. There is stuff to be done in the oil and gas sector. There are laws that are required in the maritime sector to open up that sector to significant private sector participation. There are several areas where leakages are the order of the day. There are several institutions that are duplicated. You need some legislative backing to be able to unwind some of those agencies because they are creations of law. So I will say, let the federal government, being such a significant player in the Nigerian economy, let them set the standard. Once the standard is in place, then that constructive engagement with the state governments can commence.
How about those who refer to this as the elephant in the room? Revenue generation by states. Something that, look, the authorities, the center is afraid to broach that topic because if you do, you can't even tell the other states who have got mineral resources to go ahead with all of those because you have to address the question of resource control. Yeah. So what should we do about that?
Well, Chamberlain, you are going back to politics. There is a need for a recalibration of even our political structure because all of the natural resources that you mentioned, they are resident in the various states of the Federation. But the current laws say the federal government has direct control and oversight over those matters. So there is a need for our legislature to actually step up to the plate. My view, this is the time to do that fundamental overhaul, both of the political structure and even our economic structure. This is the time because we've had too many opportunities to get things done. Right now, our revenue, our economy, all of the signs, the headwinds are very, very significant. And we need to be careful. 100 million plus people are in abject poverty. So that is a time bomb waiting to explode. So it must be carefully managed. So we need clarity from government right now to say this is the direction politically in terms of the restructuring and reforms that must take place, and economically in terms of let us cut back on some wastage and let's have a clear blueprint.
Well, that poverty index that you hinted at was something that the president also is not unaware of, given that he also addressed it in his June 12 message of last year, saying that we need to pull 100 million people out of poverty, but in partnership with the states. So how do you see the states playing, in line with what he has said? Because dwindling oil revenue means lower allocation to the states.
That is correct. Most states are well aware of the economic situation in the country. And I know that the drive for IGR is uppermost for most states. However, there are some states that are not going to be sustainable ever without allocations from the federal government. I don't know how we're going to reverse the trend of further splintering the states, because there's still people clamoring for independence and states to be, removed. Should we start looking inwards where there are limitations to external debt by states? Because a lot of states are living off debt. If the government do not pay allocations from the center, some states can't even meet the former capital expenditure for their states. They can't pay salaries. Now that they've increased the minimum wage, some states probably will not be able to handle it. And I know there's still a drive in most states to recruit, because the state is the largest employer of labor. So, there's so many things that we need to do, but the first port of call is let's block all the wastage and leakages. We can't afford the government we're running. The National Assembly is expensive to run. Federal government is expensive to run because we have agencies and ministries and departments and all of that. And then we have a lifestyle that we've acquired over the years that we really personally, as individuals in Nigeria, cannot afford.
I recall last time Mr. Rotimi was here, we were talking about, the debt that was approved by the National Assembly, about $22 billion. And, we talked extensively about that. And now we have a drop in oil prices. And people are wondering, where does this put us? Now the prices have dropped. We will have obligations eventually. We don't know how long this will take. So was this a proactive step maybe? People are saying maybe the government saw into the future and thought, let's borrow this. Or this puts us even deeper into that hole.
I subscribe to the latter position, because in the 2020 budget, debt service was going to consume 2.7 trillion naira. Debt service to GDP is in excess of 65%. Now, to revenues.
Right.
When your revenue drops further, it means that the proportion of your debt to that revenue increases significantly. So your ability to take on new borrowings is hindered, because anybody that is going to lend you money, the first thing they want to see is, how do you pay back? Even if it is at 0% interest rate, you must pay back the principal sum. So in a scenario where your revenues are consistently dropping and the future outlook is uncertain regarding those revenues, and you still continue to live large because you are not cutting back on your expenditure, I would say as a lender, we will struggle even with those loans that we were negotiating.
So do we, one, devalue the naira and can external reserves stand the grounds?
Well, the central bank governor sometime last year said he will resist devaluation with every fiber of his
Before
being.
the last one happened,
yes.
This kind of narrative.
Now, he then put a caveat and said, if our reserves drop below $30 billion, if our oil price drops significantly below benchmark, he may have no option. Now, that perfect storm I spoke about earlier, this is it. We're $20 off the benchmark. Our reserves has dropped between the middle of last year and now. We've lost almost $10 billion of reserves. With the current scenario now, the reserves will drop quicker because we still are an import-driven economy. So we still need to import to keep our factories running. Industrial Nigeria is dependent on imported input.
The ball is back on the table of the CBN?
Bottom line is this, that liberalization, first of all, in petrol prices. Secondly, even in our foreign exchange, the value of our naira vis-a-vis convertible currencies, there is no way around it.
But
it
then
has to happen.
If we look inwards and perhaps stop all this acquired taste that we do have,
Do more of Ogi.
can we get rid of this?
I think mentally we need to start seeing that change. I remember there was a time when, you know, milk and sugar and Bonvita disappeared from tables. And Nigeria, you know, started to look inwards, and we saw some traction. But as soon as the economy started to improve a little, you know, everybody was just waiting to go back to the old lifestyle.
Habits die hard, huh?
Yes, but I think there's need now for the government to put the face out there and be the ones to bail the cat.
Well, they say that will be the first of the briefings, so we'll be looking forward to subsequent briefings and specifics in terms of what they're doing. But we have to thank you both for coming on. Ronke Onodigo is oil and gas consultant, and Bayo Rotimi is a financial consultant, also of the Quest Advisory Services.